They didn't come to my wedding. No call, no text. You chose him. You deal with it, my mother said. The slamming door, a final verdict. 3 years later, I pulled my $135,000 Porsche 911 Carrera into the corporate parking lot and saw my parents waiting outside the glass lobby of my firm. They didn't see me. They only saw the car. And all I saw was an opportunity. My name is Ava Marlowe, and on the day I got married, I was 32 years old. The wedding took place in a renovated timber warehouse in Harborfield, a small town in Montana known more for its logging history than for romance. We had chosen it for its raw, honest bones. The air smelled of freshly sawn pine and damp earth, a scent of new beginnings. Hundreds of warm, yellow string lights were crisscrossed beneath the high, raftered ceiling, casting a soft, forgiving glow that made the cavernous space feel intimate, like a private constellation. An acoustic guitarist sat on a stool in the corner, his gentle melodies weaving through the quiet chatter of our friends. Everything was perfect, a carefully constructed dream of reclaimed wood and understated elegance. Everything, except for the 2 empty chairs. They were positioned at the small, round table beside the wedding cake, a simple 3-tiered creation with white buttercream and a few sprigs of eucalyptus. 2 small, elegant cards, hand-lettered in gold ink, rested against the wine glasses. One said, "Mom," the other said, "Dad." The chairs were perfectly arranged, the napkins folded into pristine fans, the silverware gleaming under the soft lights. They were not just empty, they were monumentally so, an abyss carved out of the celebration. I found my gaze drifting back to them throughout the evening. 2 silent accusers in a room full of laughter. I stood there for a long moment, my own champagne flute untouched, watching the space where my parents were supposed to be. It was a clean, precise cut, an amputation performed without anesthetic. The last message I had received from my mother was a text, sent 3 days before the wedding. I had been in the final dress fitting, standing on a pedestal surrounded by mirrors, the seamstress fussing with the hem of my gown. My phone buzzed on the nearby velvet chaise. I read the 5 words on the screen, and the reflection in the mirror seemed to sharpen, to become someone else, a woman made of glass. "We won't endorse your choices." That was all. No explanation, no argument, not even an outburst of anger that I could have fought against. It was a corporate statement, a sterile and final judgment delivered from a boardroom I wasn't invited into. The choice, of course, was Noah. A man they had met twice, a man whose quiet decency and unwavering belief in me they had mistaken for a lack of ambition. They saw him as a deviation from the path they had mapped out for me, a path that led to a predictable, financially advantageous union with a man from a family they understood, a family whose net worth they could quantify. Their love, I had learned, was conditional, an investment that was expected to yield a certain kind of return. Noah was, in their eyes, a bad investment. The text was not a plea or a warning, it was a notice of divestment. Noah found me by the cake table, his presence a warm anchor in the cold sea of my thoughts. He didn't ask what was wrong. He never needed to. He simply took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine, his thumb rubbing a steady, reassuring circle on my skin. The gesture said everything the 2 empty chairs did not. It said, "I am here. We are here." I turned away from the chairs and smiled at him, a smile I had been practicing in the mirror for 72 hours. It was a good smile. It was bright, unwavering, and revealed nothing. With Noah's hand in mine, I moved through the crowd of our guests, a bride playing her part with meticulous perfection. I laughed at jokes, accepted heartfelt embraces, and thanked friends who had traveled across the country to be with us. I could feel their furtive glances toward my side of the family aisle, the unspoken questions hanging in the air, but I kept smiling, carefully tucking the void inside me away, compressing it into a hole as small and sharp as the point of a pin. It was there, a tiny, piercing pain, but no one else needed to see it. The betrayal was not limited to my parents. It was a coordinated, systematic erasure. My father's brother, my Uncle David, had called the morning of the wedding. His voice was strained, full of a hollow heartiness that didn't fool me for a second. "Ava, sweetheart, I am so sorry. A freak storm in Denver. All flights are grounded. We're stuck. A freak storm. I had already checked the weather reports. The skies over Denver were clear. I knew, with a certainty that settled in my bones like ice, that my parents had made the calls. They had issued a decree. Our wedding was not to be attended, not to be acknowledged, not to be spoken of. They had not just refused to come, they had forbidden anyone who answered to them from validating my happiness. They were building a wall around me, and they expected me to feel like a prisoner. A week later, back in our small apartment, I made one final, foolish attempt to breach that wall. I chose the most beautiful photograph from the wedding. It was a candid shot. Noah and I laughing on the dance floor, oblivious to the camera. The light from the Edison bulbs caught in my hair, and his face was alight with a joy so pure it almost hurt to look at. It was a picture of undeniable happiness, a piece of evidence I thought even they couldn't refute. I attached it to an email, my finger hovering over the send button. I wrote no subject line, no text in the body. The photograph was the entire message. I sent it to my mother's personal address. The reply came back in less than a minute. It was not from her. It was an automated system response, clinical and indifferent. The subject line read, "Delivery status. Notification, failure." The body contained a single, brutal line of black text. "The recipient's mailbox is full." Full. She hadn't just ignored my email. She had constructed a digital fortress so complete that my message couldn't even reach the gates. She had filled her life to the brim, leaving no space, not even a single kilobyte, for a picture of her daughter's joy. That night, our official wedding night, was quiet. We had checked into a downtown hotel after the reception, but the exhaustion was too deep for celebration. Noah fell asleep almost instantly, his breathing slow and even beside me, but I was awake, my mind a silent, whirring machine. The emotions of the day had been carefully packed away, and what was left was a stark, cold clarity. I lay in the dark, the city lights painting pale stripes across the ceiling, and I opened my laptop. There, in my personal inbox, was an email with the subject line, "Offer of employment, Stratagem North." I had been through 3 rounds of interviews before the wedding, a grueling process for a senior analyst position in their data strategy division. I had almost forgotten about it in the final flurry of wedding preparations. Now, in the sterile blue light of the screen, I read the formal language, the salary figure that made me sit up straighter, the details of the benefits package. It was a world away from the emotional chaos of the last few days. It was a world of logic, of key performance indicators, of data that told a story without sentiment. It was a world where value was calculated on a spreadsheet, not withheld based on whim. And in that moment, a decision formed within me, solid and unbreakable. If my family would not stand behind me, then I would build something in front of them, not a wall of brick and mortar to hide behind, but a wall of glass, something they could see through but never touch, something that would reflect their own faces back at them, distorted by the success I would build without their endorsement. I would become someone they couldn't ignore, someone whose value was so undeniable, so publicly validated, that they would have no choice but to acknowledge my existence. I would learn to speak their language, the language of power and influence and tangible assets. The next morning, I took my wedding veil from the garment bag. It was beautiful, a cascade of fine, soft tulle edged with delicate lace. It was a symbol of the softness, the tradition, the daughter they had wanted me to be, and the bride they had refused to see. With careful, precise movements, I folded it into a neat square. I placed it in a beautiful cedar box Noah had given me years ago. As I closed the lid, the scent of cedar filling the air, I made a silent promise to myself. I would not open this box again until I had won, not by my rules of love and happiness, which they had deemed worthless, but by theirs. Later that day, I logged into my social media account. I uploaded that single, perfect photograph of Noah and me on the dance floor. I looked at the caption field for a long time, the cursor blinking patiently. I could have written a novel. I could have raged or cried or pleaded. Instead, I typed 2 words. We begin. I posted it. I did not tag my mother. I did not tag my father. I did not tag anyone. It was a declaration, quiet and absolute. A new ledger had been opened, and the first entry had been made. Stratagem North was headquartered in Glasshaven, a 19-story vertical razor of smoked glass and steel that cut a sharp line against Montagna's often overcast sky. The inside was a world of perpetual twilight, lit by the cold, clean glow of recessed lighting. The air was climate-controlled to a precise, unvarying temperature, carrying the faint, sterile scent of industrial cleaning solutions and the much stronger, acrid aroma of perpetually brewing dark roast coffee. The floors were covered in a uniform, soul-suppressing gray carpet that absorbed all sound, creating a hushed environment where the most prominent noises were the rhythmic clicking of keyboards and the low, electronic hum of servers. It was a machine for making money, and upon walking through the revolving glass doors on my first day, I understood that I was now one of its components. My direct superior, and the architect of my new reality, was Rhea Collings, the executive vice president of strategy. She was a woman who seemed to have been forged from the same materials as the building itself, polished, hard, and offering no purchase. She favored impeccably tailored suits in shades of charcoal and navy. Her dark hair always pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin at her temples. She possessed a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. Her smile was her most effective weapon. It was a quick, sharp curve of her lips that didn't reach her cool, analytical eyes. It was a tool, a finely sharpened instrument used to punctuate a statement, dismiss a concern, or signal the end of a conversation. It was a smile that could cut you, and you wouldn't even realize you were bleeding until you were back at your desk. "Ava," she said on my first day, her smile flashing briefly as she gestured to the desk in the open-plan office. "Welcome. Your first project is on your terminal. Get acquainted. We move fast here." The project was a baptism by fire. Our largest client, the Skylark Highways Corporation, a sprawling conglomerate that managed private toll roads across 3 states, was preparing to spin off its tech and logistics subsidiary for an IPO. Stratagem North was contracted to streamline their financial reporting, to package their data into a compelling story for investors. My specific task was to lead the technical side of restructuring their revenue and expenditure reporting systems. It was presented as a high-profile, high-impact assignment, a chance to prove myself immediately. It was, I would soon learn, a test of my compliance. For the first 2 weeks, I immersed myself in the data. I worked 12-hour days, fueled by the bitter coffee from the break room, sifting through terabytes of raw transaction logs, maintenance invoices, and compliance expenditure reports. Skylark's data was a messy, complex beast, but as I began to impose order, to build the new reporting architecture, a pattern began to emerge. It was a pattern of omission, a silence where there should have been noise. The data was being cleaned before it even reached the preliminary reporting stage. Specifically, the compliance cost column, a catch-all for regulatory fees, environmental impact assessments, and safety adherence costs, was being systematically zeroed out. These were not small figures. They represented millions of dollars. On paper, they were being recategorized under vague headings like operational efficiencies, or simply vanishing into the vastness of the general ledger. It was a deliberate, surgical removal of inconvenient truths, making Skylark's profit margins look impossibly healthy, impossibly perfect. I triple-checked my analysis, built a separate model to track the flow of the suppressed funds, and confirmed the anomaly. It was not an error, it was a feature. Armed with my spreadsheets and flowcharts, I scheduled a meeting with Rhea. Her office was on the 19th floor, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that offered a panoramic view of Glasshaven's skyline. It was a perch of absolute power, I laid out my findings calmly and professionally, pointing to the specific data streams on my tablet, showing her the raw logs versus the pre-processed reports. I thought I was doing my job. I thought I was flagging a risk. Ria listened without interrupting, her face impassive. When I finished, she took a slow sip of her water, the crystal glass making no sound as she placed it back on the marble coaster. Then she looked at me, and the sharp smile appeared. "This is excellent work. Ava, you're thorough," she paused, letting the compliment hang in the air for a moment before slicing through it. "But you're looking at the raw materials, not the finished product. We aren't paid to be accountants. We are paid to be storytellers." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confidential, conspiratorial tone. "We report what the market understands, and the market understands a clean, upward trajectory. It doesn't understand the nuances of regulatory friction." The phrase hung in the air. What the market understands. It was a beautiful, elegant piece of corporate jargon that meant, simply, the lie we all agree to tell. The conversation was over. I had been given the company line. I had been told, in no uncertain terms, to ignore the truth. A week later, I was in a strategy meeting in one of the sealed, windowless conference rooms in the building's core. The entire Skylark IPO team was present. Ria stood at the head of the table, in front of a massive whiteboard, in bold, black marker. She had written a phrase that I would come to see as the company's unofficial motto, its central, guiding commandment. Narrative first, numbers second. She tapped the board with the marker for emphasis. "This is our North Star for the next 6 months. Every report, every slide deck, every press release serves the narrative. The narrative is that Skylark's subsidiary is a lean, innovative, and highly profitable tech firm. The numbers will be adjusted to fit, not the other way around." No one questioned it. Heads nodded in solemn agreement. I took out my leather-bound notebook and, with my finest pen, I wrote the phrase down, dating and time-stamping the entry. I was no longer an analyst. I was a witness. The motivation for this collective delusion became clear very quickly. Our compensation structure was heavily tied to the success of the IPO. A significant portion of our annual bonuses was contingent on the subsidiary debuting above a certain valuation. For senior VPs like Ria, the payout would be in the millions. For me, it would still be life-changing. Every single person in that room had a powerful financial incentive to believe the narrative, to see only the numbers that supported it. The truth was not just inconvenient, it was expensive. I learned my lesson. I learned to keep my mouth shut in meetings. I learned to nod when Ria spoke. I learned to produce the reports that were expected of me. Reports that reflected the official, sanitized version of reality. But I also learned to listen, to watch, to record. Every meeting became a fact-finding mission. Every hushed conversation in the hallway, every casually shared piece of gossip, every redacted email chain. They were all keys, clues to how the machine truly operated. I filled notebook after notebook with observations, quotes, and system queries. My desk was my public-facing workstation. My mind was becoming a private archive. My closest, and only confidant in this maze of mirrors, was Julian Pike. He was a senior data engineer, a quiet, perpetually tired-looking man with a cynical sense of humor who had been at Stratagem North for nearly a decade. We often found ourselves in the break room at the same time, two people seeking refuge from the relentless optimism of the sales floor. One afternoon, as I was staring into my mug of muddy coffee, he leaned against the counter beside me. "You look like you've just seen the face of God and found out he fudges his expense reports." I managed a weak smile. "Something like that." "The Skylark project?" he guessed. I nodded. He sighed. A long, weary sound. "Let me give you the only piece of advice that matters here. Ava, stop digging. The truth will not set you free here. The truth will get you managed out. The truth makes you look stupid, because it proves you don't understand the game." He was right. Arguing with them was pointless. It was like trying to convince a priest that his holy texts were flawed. Their faith in the narrative was absolute, so I wouldn't argue. I would do something else. That night, I stayed late. The office emptied out, the clicking of keyboards fading away until there was only the low hum of the building's life support. In the quiet darkness, I began to build my own version of the truth. Using a secure, encrypted personal partition on the company's massive server array, I started constructing a parallel data warehouse. I wrote scripts that would run in the dead of night, quietly duplicating every raw, unfiltered data stream from the Skylark project. The transaction logs, the invoices, the original compliance reports, before they were scrubbed, before the narrative was applied. It was a perfect, pristine reflection of the raw data, an uncorrupted twin to the system everyone else was looking at. I named the repository Mirror. It was my secret. It was my insurance policy. It was the first brick in the glass wall I had promised myself I would build. 6 months after I started at Stratagem North, my first quarterly performance bonus was deposited into my bank account. The notification arrived via a sterile corporate email, but the number was so unexpectedly large that I thought it had to be a typo. An extra zero added an error. It was more than my entire first year's salary at my previous job. This was not a performance bonus. This was a statement. Rhea summoned me to her office that afternoon. The ever-present sharp smile was on her face as I walked in. She didn't ask me to sit. "You've adapted well, Ava," she said, her eyes scanning a report on her screen, giving me only a fraction of her attention. "You're learning to see the bigger picture. You provide the data that serves the narrative. You don't ask unnecessary questions. The company values that." She finally looked up, her gaze pinning me in place. "Consider the amount in your account an incentive, a tangible encouragement for those who understand how things work. An incentive, hush money, gilded and presented as a reward." I felt a chill spread through me, a cold recognition of the transaction that had just taken place. I had traded my silence for this sum. I had allowed the narrative to obscure the truth, and this was my payment. A wave of nausea rose in my throat, but I swallowed it down, replacing it with something harder, something more useful. "Thank you, Rhea," I said, my voice even and calm. "I appreciate the encouragement." Her smile widened by a millimeter. "Good," she said. The dismissal was absolute. I walked out of her office and back to my desk, the number from the email echoing in my mind. For a moment, I saw the empty chairs at my wedding, the returned photo, the finality of my mother's text. This money was dirty. It was the product of a lie, but a lie, I was learning, was a form of power, and this power was now mine to wield. I would not save it. I would not invest it. I would translate it. The following Saturday, I walked into the Porsche dealership in downtown Glasshaven. The showroom was a cathedral of German engineering, a hushed, brightly lit space that smelled of tanned leather and wealth. I didn't browse. I knew what I wanted. I pointed to the 911 Carrera in the center of the floor. It was painted in a shade called ice silver metallic, a color that seemed to absorb the light and turn it into something cold and liquid. I didn't buy the car to flaunt my newfound wealth. I bought it as a tool, a piece of equipment for a very specific job. My parents, and people like Rhea, operated on a simple, brutal calculus of observable value. They didn't respect hard work. They respected the fruits of it. They didn't respect loyalty. They respected leverage. They didn't see the person. They saw the portfolio. I had spent a lifetime trying to get them to see me. The daughter, the scholar, the bride. It had never worked. They saw my choices as liabilities on a balance sheet they kept in their heads. The Porsche was not a car. It was a mirror, a perfectly polished, brutally expensive, $135,000 mirror that I was going to hold up to their faces. It was a message written in a language they could not fail to understand. I paid for it in full with a wire transfer. The salesman's professional deference morphed into a kind of awe. As I signed the final piece of paperwork, the stroke of the pen on the contract felt decisive, a line drawn under the past. The car's interior was upholstered in rich, cognac brown leather. The cockpit was a symphony of precise dials, brushed aluminum, and polished carbon fiber. It was not opulent. It was efficient. a machine designed for speed and control. 2 days later, I drove to the DMV and paid an exorbitant fee for a personalized license plate. It read, AVA 135. Not my name, not a clever phrase, just my name and a number. 135,000. The exact price of the deal, the precise cost of the incentive. I wanted to see it every day. I needed to remember what, exactly, had paid for the gleam of the silver paint and the growl of the flat six engine. My assigned parking spot at Stratagem North was on the subterranean G level, a concrete bunker reserved for senior management. The first time I guided the Porsche down the spiraling ramp, the sound of the engine echoed off the bare walls, a low, predatory growl. As I pulled toward the entrance, the security guard, a man named Marcus, who had given me a perfunctory nod every morning for 6 months, did something different. He straightened his back. He stood a little taller, and as my car whispered past him, he inclined his head in a short, deep bow. I noted the change with the detached precision of an analyst logging a data point. The axis of respect had shifted. My salary, my title, my face, they had all been variables in a complex equation. The car simplified the math. It was a constant, an undeniable integer of worth. I parked the car in my new, wider spot. Before getting out, I took a picture of the steering wheel, the iconic Porsche crest gleaming in the center. I sent it to Noah. No text, just the image. His reply came a minute later. Proud of you. Park it where they can see. He understood. He knew this wasn't about luxury, it was about visibility. As I rode the silent, express elevator up to the 17th floor, the memory of my wedding surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. I remembered standing in my dress, surrounded by friends, yet feeling profoundly unseen by the people who were supposed to see me most clearly. I was invisible to them then, a choice they refused to endorse, a person they refused to acknowledge. I stared at my faint reflection in the elevator's polished steel doors and made a vow. I would never be invisible again. I would become so visible, so undeniably present, that they would have to shield their eyes. That evening, in the quiet of my garage at home, I performed a small ritual. I went into the house and retrieved the cedar box from the top shelf of my closet. I opened it, and the faint scent of my wedding day, cedar, dried lavender, and the delicate perfume of the tulle, rose to meet me. I carefully lifted out the wedding veil. In the dim garage light, the lace edge seemed impossibly fragile. It was a relic from a different life, a testament to a belief in a kind of love and acceptance that had been denied. I walked to the front of the Porsche and opened the trunk, the frunk, as the salesman had called it. Inside, nestled against the dark gray carpet, was a small, leather-bound toolkit. With deliberate care, I folded the soft tool of the veil one last time and placed it in the empty space beside the wrenches and screwdrivers, a sacred memento lying beside the cold, hard tools of mechanics. The symbolism was not lost on me. It was the ghost in my new machine, a fragile piece of my past that would ride with me into the future I was building, a reminder of both the wound and the reason for the fight. The next morning, as I settled into the driver's seat, I paused before starting the engine. The car was silent, waiting. I looked at the dark, polished surface of the main instrument panel. In it, I could see a perfect, clear reflection of my own eyes. They were not triumphant. They were not boastful or greedy. They were calm. They were the eyes of a strategist, a woman who had chosen her game piece and was now ready to place it on the board. I turned the key. The engine ignited with a smooth, powerful roar, and the dashboard lit up, my reflection vanishing in the sudden glare. The Porsche was no longer just a car. It had become a character, a primary and essential prop in the silent play I was now writing, and the first act was about to begin. The Porsche was no longer a novelty. It had become part of the corporate landscape, a silver fixture in the G-level parking garage, a silent testament to my assimilation. I had played the game, kept my head down, and produced the flawless, narrative-driven reports Rhea Collings expected. My secret data warehouse, mirror, grew in the dark. a perfect, untouched photograph of a reality no one else was allowed to see. The months leading up to the Skylark subsidiary's IPO were a blur of frantic activity, a crescendo of collective effort aimed at a single, glorious payday, and then, the final quarterly report before the public offering was released. It was a masterpiece of fiction. The profit margins were not just healthy, they were impossibly, beautifully perfect. All the messy, unpredictable costs of business had been smoothed away, leaving a clean, elegant upward curve that was as alluring as it was false. It was like a piece of wood that had been sanded so aggressively that the grain, the character, the very truth of its nature, had been erased, leaving only a polished, frictionless surface. The analysts on Wall Street would love it. The investors would be ecstatic, but I knew what I was looking at. I was looking at a lie that had been polished to a high shine. That night, I didn't go home. I waited until the cleaning crews had made their rounds, and the 17th floor fell into the deep, humming silence of a building asleep. Then, with a fresh cup of bitter coffee at my side, I dove into Mirror. My public work was done. My private work was just beginning. The official reports claimed the sudden surge in profitability was due to aggressive process streamlining and synergistic operational restructuring. Beautiful, meaningless words. I was looking for the math. I started by cross-referencing the official, sanitized ledger against the raw, time-stamped transaction logs I had saved in Mirror. The discrepancy was exactly where I knew it would be. In the compliance and regulatory expenditures, in the official version, those costs had simply vanished for the final quarter. It was a digital magic trick. Now I had to find the magician's wand. I began to sift through the system's ETL logs, the digital footprints left behind every time data was extracted, transformed, and loaded from one system to another. It was painstaking, tedious work, like trying to reconstruct a conversation from the echoes in a room. I was looking for a specific type of automated script, one that would run in the dead of night and perform the digital surgery required to make millions of dollars in costs disappear. For hours, I found nothing but routine maintenance and backup operations, but then, tucked away in a subdirectory for ad hoc administrative tasks, I saw it. The script was named Clean for IPO R. The brazenness of it made the air go cold in my lungs. It wasn't hidden or obfuscated. It was labeled, a proud declaration of its own corrupt purpose. I opened the file. The code was brutally elegant, a series of commands designed to identify all transactions tagged with compliance-related expense codes, reroute them to a dormant holding account, a digital slush fund, and then overwrite the original entries with zeros. The final line of the script's metadata, however, was what made my heart hammer against my ribs. Every script run on the Stratagem North servers was digitally signed by the user who authorized it. This one was signed, RHEA Admin. There it was, the smoking gun, the direct, undeniable link between the lie in the financial reports and the woman in the corner office. I made 3 separate, encrypted copies of the script and saved them in different locations within Mirror's architecture. This was the foundation of everything. The official narrative was that Skylark had saved millions through innovation. The reality was that RHEA had simply hidden the costs, pushing a massive liability down the road until after the IPO. When the new public shareholders would be the ones to foot the bill, I expanded my search. Looking through archived internal emails for phrases from the script's comment section, I hit a goldmine. I found a chain of emails between RHEA and Skylark's CFO, discussing the need for narrative alignment in the Q4 financials. They spoke in coded language, but the meaning was clear. RHEA assured him that the final report would reflect the operational efficiencies we've discussed, and that any non-essential friction would be managed. Narrative alignment, operational efficiencies, non-essential friction. It was the vocabulary of deceit. I saved the entire email chain, complete with its server-level timestamps, to Mirror. The file was growing. It was no longer just a collection of data. It was a body of evidence. I was working late at my home office a few nights later. cross-referencing a list of Skylark's primary contractors against the invoices I'd seen disappear. When my phone rang, I didn't recognize the number, but it was a local area code. I answered, expecting a misdial. Hello? There was a moment of static-filled silence. Then a voice, electronically distorted and stripped of all identifying characteristics, spoke a single sentence. "Don't open Pandora's box, Ava." The line went dead. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, my blood turning to ice. My hand was shaking. It was one thing to be a silent observer, a secret archivist of a corporate crime. It was another thing entirely to know that someone was watching me back. They knew. Someone inside the machine knew I was digging, and they were warning me to stop. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For a moment, I considered deleting Mirror, erasing everything, and just walking away with my $135,000 piece of the lie. But the fear was quickly replaced by a cold, sharp anger. They hadn't just warned me, they had confirmed that the box was real, and that it contained something they were terrified of. The digital evidence was overwhelming, but I needed something from the outside world, a piece of proof that existed beyond our firewalls. I compiled a list of the vendors whose compliance invoices had vanished in the final quarter. I chose a mid-sized environmental consulting firm based in the next state. I couldn't call as myself. The next morning, using a burner phone, I called their accounts payable department. "Good morning," I said, pitching my voice to be helpful and slightly harried. "This is Maria from the Skylark accounting team. I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm just trying to reconcile our Q4 records before year-end, and I'm showing a few outstanding invoices from your firm that seem to have been deferred. Can you just confirm the hold status for me?" The woman on the other end was happy to help. I heard the clacking of her keyboard. "Oh yeah, the Skylark account," she said casually. "Looks like we have 3 invoices here totaling about $1.2 million. They're all marked with a note from your executive office. Says right here, hold until post-IPO. Do not submit for payment until directed." My breath caught in my throat. "Hold until post-IPO," I repeated, my voice a near whisper. "That's it. Thank you so much. You've been a huge help." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. It was real, a real instruction, impacting a real company, concerning a real sum of money. The crime was no longer confined to the digital ether. It had crossed over. I knew then that I could not do this alone. I was an analyst, not a lawyer or a federal prosecutor. I had the evidence, but I didn't know how to wield it without destroying myself in the process. I needed an ally, a professional who understood the rules of this particular kind of war. I spent the next 2 days researching. I wasn't looking for a corporate lawyer from a big, established firm. They were all part of the same club. I needed an outsider, a specialist. I found her in a Financial Journal profile. Her name was Maeve Donovan. She was a forensic accountant and an independent legal consultant who had a reputation for taking on impossible cases against massive corporations. The article called her a virtuoso of the balance sheet and described her as having a scorched earth approach to corporate malfeasance. She was exactly who I needed. Finding a secure way to contact her was my next challenge. I ended up using a series of encrypted channels to send a message to the general inbox of her small boutique firm. I didn't identify myself. I didn't make any accusations. I attached a heavily encrypted data packet containing a small, curated sample of my findings. The Clean for IPO, R script, one of the email chains about narrative alignment, and a summary of the suppressed invoice data. My message was brief and framed as a hypothetical consultation. To Ms. Donovan, I am seeking a consultation on a matter of complex financial reporting. Attached is a sample data packet concerning a hypothetical company preparing for an IPO. My questions are as follows. 1. Does the attached script represent standard accounting practice? 2. Do the attached emails represent a violation of SEC disclosure requirements? 3. What would be the potential legal exposure for a company presenting financials that were manipulated in this fashion? I look forward to your assessment. I hit send, my finger trembling slightly. I had just thrown a rock at the hornet's nest. I had no idea if she would even respond. The reply came less than 24 hours later. It was shorter than my own message, devoid of any legal jargon or pleasantries. It consisted of 2 short, powerful sentences that set the course for everything that was to come. Maintain the status quo. We need a stage. Maeve Donovan's words became my new mantra. Maintain the status quo. We need a stage. For weeks, I lived inside that command. I went to work. I built the narrative-aligned reports, and I watched the pieces move into place for the Skylark IPO. I was a model employee, a silent, efficient cog in the machine, and all the while, Mirror grew, a silent, perfect record of the truth. I was living a dual life, and the strain of it was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my skin. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't seen in 3 years. It was from my father. The message was 6 words long. Mom wants to see you. Brunch? 3 years of absolute, deafening silence. And this was how it was broken. Not with an apology, not with an explanation, not even with a simple, "How are you?" It was a summons, disguised as a question. Mom wants to see you. It was a statement of royal prerogative. I stared at the message, a cold, analytical calm settling over me. The timing was too perfect. The IPO was now the talk of the financial world, and Stratagem North's involvement was a point of pride in Glasshaven's business community. My name, and the silver Porsche I drove, had apparently reached their ears. They hadn't missed their daughter. They had noticed an asset they had previously written off was suddenly appreciating in value. "We need a stage," May had said. I typed my reply. "This Sunday, the Cinder Room at noon." The Cinder Room was my choice. It was the most expensive, ostentatiously minimalist restaurant in the nearby city of Rivermark. It was a place of hushed tones, heavy silver cutlery, and tables spaced so far apart that intimacy was impossible. It was a place for transactions, not reconciliations, the perfect stage. I arrived exactly at noon. They were already seated at a prime table by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a pristine white orchid in a small vase between them. My mother was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater set and a string of pearls. Her smile, when she saw me, was a masterpiece of social engineering, a precise arrangement of facial muscles that conveyed welcome without a trace of genuine warmth. My father, looking older and grayer than I remembered, simply nodded, a flicker of something, unease, perhaps, in his eyes. "Ava, you look, well," my mother said, her eyes doing a swift, expert appraisal of my tailored dress, my leather handbag, my understated but expensive watch. "You too, Mom," I replied, my voice neutral. I sat down, placing my handbag on the empty chair beside me. Then, with a deliberate, unhurried movement, I took the key to the Porsche from my bag and placed it on the crisp white tablecloth next to my water glass. The silver crest gleamed under the restaurant's artfully directed spotlights. My mother's eyes, which had been scanning the room, immediately locked onto it. The polite smile on her face faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by a raw, naked look of avarice. She reached out, her fingers with their perfectly manicured nails not grabbing the key, but stroking it, a long, slow caress across the embossed leather of the fob. She ran her thumb over the silver crest as if she were a museum curator examining a priceless artifact. It was a gesture of ownership, of assessment. She withdrew her hand and folded it with my father's on the table. She looked at me, her smile now back in place, but different, warmer, more authentic. It was the smile she reserved for things that met her approval. "Are you doing okay, dear?" she asked. The question was a formality. Her eyes had already found the answer on the table. "I'm doing very well," I said, meeting her gaze. The small talk that followed was excruciating. They asked about my apartment, but not about Noah. They asked about my work in a general, uninterested way, like someone asking about the weather in a distant country. I answered their questions with concise, unrevealing statements. It was a dance, a carefully choreographed performance of familial interest, and we all knew our steps. Then, as the waiter cleared our appetizer plates, my father cleared his throat, signaling the end of the overture. It was time for the main performance. "You know, Ava," he began, leaning forward with a conspiratorial air, "your mother and I were just talking. A very interesting opportunity has come up." I took a slow sip of water, my eyes steady on his. "Oh?" "A good friend of mine, Richard Albright, you wouldn't know him. He has a position on the board of a major investment bank. He's been advising us on a few things, and he has some very, very strong feelings about this upcoming Skylark IPO." The name landed on the table with a soft, explosive weight. I kept my expression perfectly blank, a mask of polite interest. "He says the smart money is getting in, and getting in big," my father continued, his voice dropping. "He has some inside information, of course. Says the financials are rock solid, better than anyone knows. He's projecting the stock will double, maybe triple, in the first week. We're putting a significant amount in. We thought of you. We thought, this is something that could be very good for your future." I could smell it then, the familiar, cloying scent that had permeated my entire childhood. It was the smell of conditional respect. It was the perfume of affection that came with dividends. They weren't offering me a gift. They were trying to recruit me into their club, to bring my new, impressive asset, my income, my access, under the family umbrella. They weren't welcoming a daughter back into the fold. They were proposing a merger. I placed my water glass down with a quiet click. "I work at Stratagem North," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Skylark is our client. It would be a massive conflict of interest for me to discuss this. In fact, it would be illegal." A flicker of annoyance crossed my father's face. This was not the response he had expected. My mother, however, simply tilted her head, her smile becoming something pitying, something patronizing. "Oh, Ava," she said softly, as if speaking to a child who didn't understand the rules of the adult world. "Don't be so dramatic. This is family. Your father always taught you, family comes first. You remember that, don't you?" The hypocrisy was so pure, so potent, it was almost breathtaking. Family comes first. The words hung in the air, a grotesque distortion of the truth. I looked from her face to my father's, and I saw no shame, no self-awareness. They truly believed their own narrative. I picked up my coffee cup, the warm ceramic a solid, comforting presence in my hands. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the silence stretch, letting her words hang in the space between us. I looked out the window for a moment, at the people passing by on the sunlit street, living their lives, blissfully unaware of the quiet, brutal transaction taking place at this table. Then I turned my gaze back to my mother. "I remember," I said, my voice as calm and cool as the surface of a deep lake, "that my family didn't come to my wedding." The silence that followed was different. It was not a pause. It was a vacuum. All the air, all the pretense, all the false warmth was sucked out of the space around our table. My father's face went pale. He looked down at his hands as if he had never seen them before. My mother's smile didn't just vanish. It shattered, leaving behind a brittle, slack-jawed expression of shock. They had no response. The truth, spoken so plainly, was a weapon for which they had no defense. I had broken the unspoken rule. I had brought up the past. I had brought up a debt they had no intention of ever acknowledging, let alone repaying. In that profound, ringing silence, as my parents stared at the table, a tiny flicker of light caught my eye. It was a reflection in the vast pane of glass beside our table. For a split second, I saw a flash, the unmistakable glint of a camera's flash from a parked car across the street. My heart gave a single, hard jolt. It was gone as quickly as it came, a ghost of light in the bright afternoon. Was it a tourist? A coincidence? Or was it something else? My mind immediately went to May Donovan. We need a stage. A stage, I realized, implies an audience, The thought was chilling, but it was also clarifying. I was no longer a solo performer. The play had begun, and there were actors in the wings I hadn't even met yet. I looked back at my parents, who were still lost in the wreckage of our conversation, and I felt a strange, cold calm. They had come here for my money. They had no idea that I was about to ask them to pay for something far more valuable. The brunch with my parents was not a reconciliation. It was a reconnaissance mission. It confirmed the final variable in my equation. They could be leveraged. Their greed was a predictable input. That evening, in a secure video call with Maeve Donovan, the last pieces of the plan clicked into place. Her face on my screen was sharp, framed by a severe black bob, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer comfort or validation. She offered strategy. "They've given you the motive," she said, her voice a low, precise hum. "Their friend, Richard Albright, will be our corroborating witness, whether he knows it or not. Now, we architect the fall." What followed was not a plan born of rage, but a wireframe constructed from logic. It was a sequence of operations, a flowchart of cause and effect designed with the cold, dispassionate precision of a data analyst building a predictive model. Emotion was a liability. This was an exercise in systems architecture. Objective: to execute a controlled, legal, and public demolition of the fraudulent narrative surrounding the Skylark IPO. The detonation point would be the final all-hands board preview meeting, the day before the official investor roadshow. This was Ria's magnum opus, her moment of ultimate triumph before the payout. It would, instead, be her tribunal. Primary asset: the data warehouse designated Mirror. Its contents constituted a complete and irrefutable body of evidence. This was not a collection of circumstantial clues. It was the digital soul of the crime. The asset inventory included unfiltered system logs, a complete, time-stamped record of every transaction, data manipulation, and user access event, dating back to my first day, verbatim email archives, all internal and external communications pertaining to narrative alignment, including the critical chain between Ria and Skylark's CFO. Suppressed invoices, digital copies of every invoice from every vendor that had been marked hold until post-IPO, cross-referenced with vendor-side confirmations. System timestamps, indisputable server-level metadata proving the sequence of events, showing the raw data entering the system and the exact moment the fraudulent script was executed. The script, a clean, isolated copy of Clean for IPO, digitally signed by the user profile, the weapon, with the killer's fingerprint. Key personnel, allies. Maeve Donovan, legal counsel, the strategist and external trigger. Maeve had already used her channels to quietly alert the chairman of the board, a man known for his rigid adherence to protocol, of a potential material irregularity in the IPO filings, without revealing the source. She had secured his proxy to initiate an immediate internal audit the moment she gave the word. She was the failsafe, the legal air cover. Julian Pike, technical execution. The insider. Julian, with his decade of knowledge of Stratagem North's labyrinthine systems, was the fulcrum of the entire operation. His disillusionment had finally outweighed his inertia. He agreed to help, not out of friendship, but out of a weary desire to see the machine break for once. His task was specific and critical. On my signal, he would reroute the data source for the main presentation screen. He would trigger a system failover, a common procedure for when a primary data source becomes unstable. The system would seamlessly switch to its designated backup. For the purpose of this presentation, Julian would designate Mirror as that backup. It would appear to be a technical hiccup, a non-event. In reality, it would be the flick of a switch that turned on the lights. The stage. The 19th floor main conference room, colloquially known as the Glass Box. It was Ria's throne room, a panoramic theater of power with 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling glass offering a god's-eye view of the city. The fourth wall was a seamless, 30-foot LED display. The board preview was scheduled for 09 on Quoc, the day of the dress rehearsal for the IPO roadshow. The audience would consist of the company's board of directors, the senior executive team, and the lead bankers. It was the highest-stakes internal meeting of the year. The prop, the Porsche 911 Carrera, license plate AVA 135. It was no longer a mirror, but a lure. 2 days before the meeting, I would send a carefully worded text to my father. Big day Friday, the final presentation for the Skylark deal. I think your friend Mr. Albright would be very interested to see the final numbers before they go public. The presentation is at 9 a.m. The lobby of my building is public space. It was an irresistible piece of bait, an offer of insider status. They would come, bringing Albright with them, expecting to witness a confirmation of their impending windfall. They would become my audience, my unwilling witnesses, trapped in the glass lobby below. The exit strategy. A fully compiled, encrypted data packet containing the entirety of Mirror's Eye evidence. This packet was uploaded to a secure third-party server and linked to the official SEC whistleblower online submission portal. The submission was primed, the fields filled out, the submit command tied to a simple, automated trigger. Maeve's paralegal had written a script that would monitor Stratagem North's internal presentation server. The moment the slide titled Q3 Margin Excellence and Forward Guidance was pushed live to the LED screen, the script would execute the submission. It was an automated dead man's switch. The moment Rhea began to present her greatest lie, the truth would already be in the hands of the regulators. My protection was baked into the attack itself. The tipping point. The core of the verbal confrontation would not be an accusation. It would be an act of weaponized inquiry. When the slide with the impossibly perfect profit curve appeared, my first question would be a simple request for clarification. My primary target was Rhea's own mantra. I would turn her words. Narrative first, numbers second. From a corporate philosophy into Exhibit A, I would project the quote, sourced from my meeting notes and corroborated by the email chains, onto the screen beside the suppressed financial data. I would not call her a liar. I would present her own directive next to its consequences and ask the board to reconcile the two. The legal shield. Every word I spoke in that room was rehearsed with Maeve. I would not make a single statement of fact regarding the fraud. I would only ask questions. Could you clarify the process by which compliance costs are recategorized? Who holds the executive authority to approve a script like Clean for IPO, R? According to company policy, does narrative alignment allow for the indefinite deferral of material liabilities? I was not an accuser. I was a senior analyst performing her due diligence in a public forum. I was an employee concerned about process. This was my shield. I would give them no grounds for a slander suit, no reason to fire me for insubordination. I would simply pull on a single, loose thread and allow the entire tapestry to unravel on its own. Exploiting the habit. Rhea's greatest vulnerability was her arrogance. She had an unshakable belief in her own control. During high-stakes presentations, she always insisted on using a live data feed rather than static, preloaded slides. She loved the theater of it, the way the numbers could refresh in real time, giving an impression of dynamism and absolute command of the facts. This was the door Julian would walk through. When I asked my first question, Rhea would, as always, welcome the challenge, eager to perform. She would ask for the underlying data to be brought up, and Julian, with a few quiet keystrokes from his seat in the back row, would initiate the failover. The system would report a minor data stream lag, the backup would engage, and Mirror would appear on the screen. Masquerading as the real thing, Rhea herself would be the one to invite the Trojan horse through the gates. The final move, after the meeting, after the chaos erupted, after Maeve made her entrance and the board was thrown into turmoil, my work at Stratagem North would be over. My final action would not take place in the boardroom, but in the parking garage. I would walk down to the G level, to the silver car that had served as my lure. I would walk to the front, open the trunk, and remove the wedding veil I had placed there months before. I would not look back at the building. I would not answer the inevitable, frantic calls from my parents. In the quiet, concrete bunker, I would hold the veil, the symbol of the person they had refused to see, and I would speak a single sentence, a final closing entry for a ledger that was now, finally, balanced. The day of the board preview dawned cold and clear. The sky over Glasshaven was a pale, polished blue, and the rising sun struck the eastern face of the Stratagem North Tower, setting it ablaze with reflected light. This was a day for clarity, a day for things hidden in shadow to be brought into the sun. The wireframe was complete. It was time to execute the code. 7:10 a.m. I bypassed the ramp to the secure G-level garage. Today, the Porsche was not a private symbol of my status. It was a public beacon. I guided the car into the visitor's lot, selecting a prime spot directly in front of the main glass lobby, an unmissable slash of silver against the dark asphalt. The engine settled into a low, contented hum before I cut it, the silence that followed seeming to press in on the car. As I stepped out, the morning air was crisp and cool. Marcus, the head of security, was standing near the main doors. He saw me, and his usual nod of deference was accompanied by a brief, curious smile. He watched me walk toward the entrance, his eyes lingering on the car, a silent, unknowing admirer of the bait I had just set. 7:25 a.m. I was at my desk, the 17th floor still sparsely populated, the quiet punctuated only by the low hum of the servers and the distant hiss of the HVAC system. My phone vibrated against the polished wood. A text from my father. "We're downstairs. Beautiful car." The words were a jolt of ice-cold confirmation. The lure had been taken. I pictured them in the lobby, my mother smoothing her expensive coat, my father rocking on his heels, both of them looking up at the tower of glass and steel with a sense of vicarious ownership. They believed they were about to be initiated into the inner circle, to be given a glimpse of the machine that printed money. They had no idea they were there to witness it being dismantled. I did not reply. 7:40 a.m. The final step of my insurance policy. I opened a new, encrypted email draft addressed to Maeve Donovan. My fingers moved with a steady, deliberate calm across the keyboard. I attached the final, fully compiled data packet from Mirror. It was a massive file, a digital ghost of Stratagem North's biggest lie, containing every email, every log, every line of code that proved the fraud. The subject line was stark. A prearranged directive we had agreed upon. The kind of instruction you give when you're not sure you'll be the one to see the mission through. I typed the 4 words. If I vanish, press send. My finger hovered over the mouse for a single, long second. This was the point of no return. The moment I sent this, I was committing to the fall. One way or another, I clicked. The email left my outbox with a faint, digital whoosh, a point of light racing through the darkness to my only ally. 0800 a.m. A secure chat window blinked open on my secondary monitor. It was Julian. His message was a single line of text. A small, green indicator light pulsed steadily in the corner of his message, a digital heartbeat confirming that our parallel reality was online and ready. Mirror was no longer just an archive. It was a live, breathing system, perfectly mimicking the company's official data feeds, waiting to be swapped into the spotlight. I sent back a one-word reply. The channel went silent. 08:15 a.m. The 19th floor conference room began to fill. The air, which had been clean and sterile, now thickened with the scent of expensive cologne, coffee, and money. The board members arrived first, a collection of silver-haired men and impeccably dressed women who moved with the slow, deliberate gravity of people accustomed to power. Then came the bankers, younger, sharper, their eyes gleaming with the promise of multi-million-dollar commission checks. I took my seat at the long, polished obsidian table, a junior analyst in a room of titans. My presence required, but my input. They believed, irrelevant. Rhea stood at the head of the room, running a final check of her slide deck with the AV technician. She was in absolute command, her voice crisp and clear, cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "Let's test the live data link on slide 12. Please, I want it seamless." She was a conductor on opening night, ensuring every instrument was perfectly in tune before the first note was played. 08:30 a.m. Under the guise of reviewing my notes for the presentation, I opened a diagnostic window on my laptop. With a series of coded commands, I covertly pinged the data stream Julian had prepared. My screen flickered, and then a stream of raw financial data began to scroll down the window. It was perfect. The numbers from Mirror, the unscrubbed, unedited, damningly honest numbers, were flowing through the building's network, disguised as a standard backup feed. The connection was flawless, the data populating my screen as smoothly and clearly as a reflection on undisturbed water. I closed the window, my own heartbeat a steady, calm rhythm in my chest. The technical components were locked in place. The trap was set. 08:45 a.m. An email notification chimed on my laptop. It was a high priority. All-hands message to the Skylark IPO team from Ria's administrative assistant. The subject line made my blood run cold and hot at the same time. Urgent. Cancel side ledger. My eyes scanned the text. It was a panicked, last-minute directive. A clumsy attempt to erase a final piece of incriminating evidence. The informal, off-book accounting system where they had been parking the deferred costs. Someone had gotten spooked. This was a gift. A final, unsolicited confession. With 3 swift keystrokes, I took a screenshot of the entire email, including the header with its precise timestamp. I encrypted the image and, using a secure backchannel, uploaded it directly to Mirror. It was the final page of my evidence binder, delivered just minutes before the trial was set to begin. 08:58 a.m. The soft, electronic chime of the executive elevator announced the arrival of more guests in the 19th floor lobby just outside the glass box. Through the clear wall, I saw the doors slide open. My parents stepped out, my mother looking around with an expression of smug satisfaction. Between them stood a portly, florid man in a suit that was too tight at the collar. Richard Albright. My father caught my eye through the glass and gave me a small, conspiratorial wink. Albright's gaze swept the room and settled on me. His eyes narrowed for a moment, and he glanced down at the name placard on the table in front of me. AVA Marlowe. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, the look of a man trying to place a name that he had seen before in a different context, perhaps at the bottom of a financial report he hadn't bothered to read too closely. He was looking at a ghost, a name on a page that had suddenly, inconveniently materialized in front of him. 9:00 a.m. Ria strode to the head of the table. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her sharp smile flashing across the room. "Let's begin." On her cue, the heavy glass doors to the conference room slid silently shut, sealing us inside. The low murmur of the lobby, the sound of the city, the distant whisper of the wind against the building's facade, it all faded away, replaced by a low, humming white noise. We were in a vacuum, a theater, a courtroom. I took a slow, deep breath, my hands resting calmly on the cool surface of the table. The scent of the cognac-brown leather from the Porsche's interior, a scent that had seeped into the cuff of my blazer that morning, rose to meet me. It was a grounding scent, a reminder of the machine I had built, the prop I had set, and the journey I had taken to arrive at this exact moment, in this exact chair. The rehearsal was over. Ria stood before the 30-foot LED screen, a conductor at her podium. The room was hers, the board members and bankers her rapt audience. She moved through the opening slides with the fluid, confident grace of a master performer, her voice a polished, persuasive instrument. Her narrative was a symphony of success, each data point a perfectly orchestrated note, building toward a grand crescendo. And then it came. Slide 12. The screen filled with a single, elegant chart titled, "Quarterly Excellence, a New Paradigm of Profitability." It was dominated by a beautiful, clean green line, arcing inexorably upward, a perfect, frictionless ascent. There were no dips, no corrections, no messy realities. It was the graphical equivalent of a surface of a perfectly still lake at dawn, reflecting a flawless sky. "As you can see," Ria said, her voice resonant with pride, "our strategic initiatives in the Skylark portfolio have resulted in a margin growth that is not just impressive, it is unprecedented. This is the story, the powerful, undeniable story, that we will be taking to the market." The bankers nodded, their faces alight with greed. The chairman of the board smiled, a thin, satisfied expression. This was the moment. I drew a slow, silent breath. My voice, when I spoke, was calm and clear, cutting through the self-congratulatory haze. "Ria, my apologies for the interruption." Every head in the room turned toward me. My name placard, Ava Marlowe, seemed to catch the light. Ria's smile tightened by a fraction of a degree. She had been interrupted by a junior analyst. "I have a clarifying question for the board's benefit," I continued, my gaze steady on hers. "Could you just confirm that this chart is being populated from a live data feed?" It was a test of her arrogance, and she did not disappoint. A small, condescending smile played on her lips. She saw an opportunity to demonstrate her command of the details, to put the impertinent analyst in her place. "Of course, Ava," she said, her tone patronizing. "All our projections are pulled from the live server. We pride ourselves on absolute, real-time transparency." The words hung in the air. Absolute, real-time transparency. "Thank you," I said. "That's all I needed to know." Across the room, I saw Julian Pike, seated at a small tech station in the back, discreetly tap 3 keys on his laptop. On the massive screen, the flawless chart flickered once. It was an almost imperceptible glitch, the kind of brief signal disruption that happens a dozen times a day in a building like this. No one reacted, but when the image stabilized a second later, it was different. The beautiful green line was still there, but now, shadowing it from below, was a new line, a jagged, angry red line that had not been there before. A small legend appeared in the corner of the screen. The green line was labeled Reported Margin. The red line was labeled Actual Margin, including suppressed costs. A low murmur rippled through the room. Ria's eyes widened, her smile frozen in place. She stared at the screen, a flicker of disbelief, of pure, animal panic, in her eyes. Before she could speak, the chart vanished, replaced by a new image. It was a scanned invoice from an environmental consulting firm, the total figure a stark 7 digits. Then another invoice appeared next to it, and another, and another. They tiled across the screen, a mosaic of debt, and on each one, a handwritten note in the margin had been digitally circled in red. The note was the same on every single one. Hold until post-IPO. The images slid onto the screen with a digital hiss, like a deep scratch being gouged into the flawless glass of Ria's presentation. The screen changed again. The invoices were replaced by the stark black and white text of an email chain between Ria and the CFO of Skylark. My software had highlighted the key phrases: narrative alignment, manage the friction, recategorize for market clarity. Ria found her voice a strained, brittle thing. "There seems to be a technical issue," she stammered, glaring toward Julian. "Shut it down." But Julian was staring at his screen, his face a mask of feigned concentration, as if trying to solve a complex problem he had never seen before. And then came the final image. The screen went black for a second, and then a single line of text appeared, 50 times larger than anything before it, written in a bold, authoritative font that filled the 30-foot display. Narrative first, number second. And just below it, in a smaller, clinical font, was a line of metadata, a digital fingerprint pulled directly from the server, authored by RHEA admin, document created, 11:15 a.m., April 14th. The room went absolutely, profoundly silent. For 5 full seconds, the only sound was the low, almost subsonic hum of the building's ventilation system. The silence was a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was a silence made of broken trust, shattered confidence, and the dawning, horrific understanding of monumental fraud. Then, the silence was broken. A chair scraped harshly against the floor. Someone gasped. From the far end of the table, a heavy, gold-plated pen slipped from a banker's nerveless fingers and clattered onto the obsidian tabletop, the sound as loud as a gunshot in the stillness. I let the silence hang for one more beat, and then I spoke again. My voice still calm, still measured, the voice of an analyst asking a question about process. "My question is," I said, looking not at Ria, but at the chairman of the board, "who in this company has the authority to approve the systemic removal of audited compliance costs from a pre-IPO financial report?" Ria's face was a ruin, the mask of cool. Corporate control had not just slipped, it had disintegrated, leaving behind a pallid, sweating visage of pure fury and terror. Her eyes, when they locked on me, were filled with a venomous hatred. "Ava," she snarled, her voice a low, shaking hiss that barely carried across the room. "You don't understand the big picture. You are out of your depth." It wasn't a denial, it was a threat. But it was the weak, flailing threat of a queen who had just been publicly checkmated. At that exact moment, the heavy glass doors at the back of the conference room slid open with a soft, pneumatic sigh. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was a woman I had only ever seen on a screen. Maeve Donovan. She was flanked by 2 grim-faced men in dark suits. She was the picture of calm authority, her severe black bob unruffled, her dark eyes sweeping the room and taking in the entire scene in a single, comprehensive glance. She held a single sheet of paper in her hand. She did not look at Ria. Her eyes found the chairman of the board. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying an authority that eclipsed everyone else's in the room. "On your proxy, we are initiating an immediate, comprehensive internal audit of the Skylark IPO filings. All relevant materials, servers, and personnel are to be sequestered, effective immediately." Chaos erupted. The bankers started talking at once, their voices a rising cacophony of panic. The board members were on their feet, shouting questions at the chairman. Ria was frozen, a statue of disbelief. And in that moment of supreme distraction, as every eye in the room was fixed on the drama unfolding at the back, my left hand moved under the table. My fingers found the trackpad of my laptop. I clicked once, opening the preloaded, automated submission script. A small, simple dialog box appeared on my screen, invisible to everyone else. "Execute SEC packet submission Y/N." My thumb hovered over the pad. This was it. The final, irreversible act. I pressed down. A tiny green LED on the side of my laptop, a light I had covered with a piece of black tape, flashed once, a single, secret pulse of confirmation. The file was gone. The truth was now in the hands of the federal government. No one saw the light flash. No one saw my hand drop from my laptop. My fingers coming to rest, calm and steady, on the table in front of me. My work was done. The boardroom was a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Maeve Donovan's auditors, who had been waiting on the floor below, moved with quiet, predatory efficiency, securing laptops and sequestering executives for preliminary questioning. The bankers huddled in a corner, their voices a low, panicked buzz, their dreams of massive commissions evaporating in real time. The chairman, his face a grim mask of fury, was in a hushed, intense conversation with Maeve, and Ria, stripped of her authority and her composure, stood alone and silent in the center of the room, a ghost at her own funeral. I was an island of calm in the storm I had created. My work here was done, and then my phone vibrated on the table. It was a text from my father, who was still, I assumed, in the lobby. "What is happening? Richard is panicking. He says the IPO is dead and the price will plummet. This is a disaster. His words were so perfectly, predictably him. Not, Ava, are you okay? Not, what have you gotten yourself into? But a frantic calculation of financial loss. I looked through the glass wall of the conference room to the lobby outside. I could see them, a small, terrified cluster of people by the elevator bank. My father, staring at his phone, Richard Albright, his face purple, shouting into his own device, and my mother, standing motionless, her hand to her throat, staring at the closed glass doors, at me. I typed my reply, each letter a cold, hard piece of truth. You came for the car. I invited you up for the truth. A security officer will escort you to a waiting room. Stay there. A moment later, one of Maeve's dark-suited men approached them, speaking quietly. I watched as they were led not to the elevators, but to a small, private waiting lounge adjacent to the main boardroom. It was a room I knew well, reserved for sensitive client negotiations. Its primary feature was a wall of one-way glass that looked directly into the conference room where I now sat. The stage now had a private viewing box. I watched them enter the room. They couldn't see me watching them, but they could see the aftermath of the explosion in the boardroom. They saw me, sitting at the obsidian table, calmly observing the proceedings. They saw the chairman point a trembling, accusatory finger at Rhea. They saw Maeve Donovan hand a file to one of her auditors. Their perspective had shifted. They were no longer guests waiting for a peek inside the velvet rope. They were spectators to a demolition, and they were beginning to understand that their daughter was the one holding the detonator. Albright's phone was a constant, flashing beacon, a fire alarm signaling his financial ruin. He paced the small room like a caged animal. My father sat heavily on one of the leather sofas, his head in his hands, but my mother stood pressed against the glass, her eyes fixed on me. Her expression was a complex tapestry of confusion, fear, and a dawning, horrified comprehension. An intercom on the conference table buzzed. It was the line to the waiting room. I pressed the button. Yes? My mother's voice came through the speaker. A thin, reedy whisper. The first words she had spoken to me with anything resembling genuine emotion in 3 years. Ava, stop this. Whatever you're doing, just stop it. You'll ruin your future. Her words were a relic from a dead language, a way of thinking I no longer subscribed to. The future she meant was a number in a bank account, a rung on a social ladder, a reflection in the polished hood of an expensive car. It was the only future she had ever been able to recognize. Whose future? I asked, my voice quiet, speaking to the empty air in front of me, knowing she could hear every word. I looked toward the one-way glass, toward the spot where I knew she was standing. Beyond her, through the vast windows of the lobby, I could see the sliver of silver in the visitor's lot. A trick of the light, a quirk of the reflection, made it seem as if the Porsche were right there in the room with them, a silent, gleaming observer. Are you worried about my future, or yours? She didn't answer. There was no answer. In the boardroom, the final act of the corporate drama was playing out. The chairman's voice boomed, regaining control. Rhea, you are suspended, effective immediately, pending the outcome of this investigation. Security will escort you from the building. 2 uniformed guards, the same men who managed the lobby, entered the room. They approached Rhea, their faces impassive. She didn't struggle. All the fight had gone out of her. She looked, for the first time, small and breakable. They walked her out of the room, her head held high in a last, defiant parody of her former power. The only sound was the sharp, rhythmic clicking of her heels on the marble floor, each step a tick of a clock counting down the final seconds of her career at Stratagem North. The sound faded down the hall, and then she was gone. The room began to clear out. Maeve gave me a single, sharp nod from across the room before disappearing with the chairman. My part in this was over. I stood up, collected my laptop and my phone, and walked out of the glass box, not looking at the adjacent room where my family was being held. I walked past the chaotic lobby, past the panicked executives, and stepped into the express elevator. I didn't go down to the ground floor. I pressed the button for G. The parking garage was cool, dark, and silent. The air smelled of concrete and cold exhaust. The sound of my own footsteps echoed in the vast, empty space. It was a tomb, a bunker, a place far removed from the high-altitude drama of the 19th floor. I walked to the front of my car, the silver paint seeming to glow in the dim light. I pressed the release on the key fob. The trunk popped open with a soft, hydraulic sigh. Inside, nestled beside the leather toolkit, was the white cloud of my wedding veil. I reached in and lifted it out. The tool was impossibly soft and light in my hands, a fragile ghost in the harsh, industrial environment. I closed the trunk, the veil draped over my arm. Then I turned and took the elevator back up to the 19th floor. The main lobby was mostly empty now, save for a few security guards. I walked to the waiting room and opened the door. My father and Albright were in a heated, whispered argument in the corner. My mother was still standing by the glass, though she had turned and was now staring into the room, at nothing. She looked lost. They all fell silent when I entered. I walked to the low granite table in the center of the room. With slow, deliberate movements, I unfolded the veil and spread it across the dark, polished stone. The delicate lace and soft white tulle were a stark, shocking contrast to the severe masculine energy of the room. It looked like a shroud. It looked like a sacrament. It looked like an accusation. I smoothed a final crease from the fabric, my hands steady. I looked at my mother, whose eyes were fixed on the veil, her face pale, her lips parted in a silent question. "I kept this here for 3 years," I said, my voice quiet, but carrying in the stillness of the room. My words were not for my father, or for his ruined friend. They were for her. I kept it as a promise to myself, a reminder of a day you decided was not worth your time. Today, I'm taking it back. My mother took a half step forward, her eyes wide, filled with a terrible, dawning light. She looked from the veil to my face, and for the first time, I think she finally saw me. Not the asset, not the disappointment, not the architect of her financial ruin, just her daughter. She slowly raised her hand, her fingers trembling slightly. She reached out, not for me, but for the veil. Her hand hovered in the air just above the delicate lace. Stopping a millimeter short of touching it, it hung there, suspended in the space between regret and pride, a gesture of apology from someone who had never learned the words, a desperate, silent attempt to touch a past she had deliberately and ruthlessly amputated. I didn't stay to watch my mother's hand tremble. I didn't wait for my father's anger or Albright's ruin to curdle into threats. I simply turned, leaving the veil on the table as a final, silent statement, and walked out of the room. I took the elevator down to the ground floor, my footsteps silent on the marble, a ghost leaving the scene of a successful haunting. The fallout was swift, a shockwave that rippled out from the 19th floor with institutional speed. Within the hour, an official internal memo was circulated. The Skylark IPO, the company's crowning achievement, was indefinitely postponed pending a comprehensive internal review. The language was sterile, corporate, but the message was a death sentence. The narrative was officially dead. I was in the main lobby, collecting my personal effects from a small box a nervous HR representative had packed for me, when Maeve Donovan found me. She approached not as a lawyer, but as an equal, a co-conspirator after a successful operation. The chaos of the morning had been swept away, replaced by the quiet, efficient hum of a corporation in damage control. "They've offered me a permanent retainer to oversee the internal audit and liaise with the SEC," she said, her voice a low, confidential murmur. There was no hint of triumph in her tone, only a professional satisfaction. "The chairman is a man who values his reputation above all else. You gave him the tools to protect it. He will clean his own house." She extended a hand. Her grip was firm, her skin cool. "We did the right thing, Ava." "We did what was necessary," I corrected her, my voice just as quiet. She gave a single, sharp nod, a smile touching her eyes for the first time. Necessary. Then, she released my hand and turned to leave, her dark suit blending into the muted tones of the lobby. She departed as she had arrived, a precise and effective force, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive paper and the cold, clean smell of printer's ink. A professional. I picked up my box and turned toward the main revolving doors, and there they were, my parents. They were standing near the security desk, looking lost and diminished under the lobby's soaring, cathedral-like ceiling. They were no longer prospective insiders or smug spectators. They were just two people who had made a very bad bet. They were looking at the silver Porsche, still parked in its place of honor out front, its metallic skin gleaming in the afternoon sun. But this time, their gaze was not one of avarice or pride. It was one of confusion, of loss. And when they saw me walking toward them, their eyes shifted from the car to me. For the first time that day, perhaps for the first time in years, they were actually looking at me. Ava Marlowe, their daughter. My father took a hesitant step forward, his face a wreck of conflicting emotions. The anger at his financial loss was warring with a dawning, terrible understanding of a much greater, more profound deficit. Ava, he started, his voice rough, uncertain. Can we talk? The question was a plea, a desperate, last-ditch attempt to rewind the tape, to find a version of this story where they hadn't made a fatal miscalculation. He was asking for a negotiation, for a chance to salvage something from the wreckage. I stopped a few feet from him, the box of my office belongings held in my arms. I looked at his face, then at my mother's, who stood just behind him, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. I felt nothing, not anger, not pity, not even the faint, bitter satisfaction of victory. I simply felt the cold, clean peace of a ledger that had finally been balanced. I shifted the box in my arms, freeing one hand. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and my fingers closed around the familiar, cool leather of the Porsche's key fob. I didn't take it out. I just held it. "I'm busy," I said, my voice perfectly even, devoid of any emotion. I let the words hang in the air for a moment before delivering the final, killing blow. I was free on my wedding day. I saw the impact of the words in their eyes. I saw the last flicker of hope die, replaced by the stark, empty finality of a door that had not just been closed, but locked and barred from the other side. I had used their own logic, the logic of supply and demand, of availability and value. I had been available once, and they had deemed me worthless. Now, my value was incalculable, and I was no longer on the market. Without another word, I walked past them. I pushed through the revolving glass doors and stepped out into the cool, bright air of the city. The noise of the traffic was a welcome intrusion, a return to a world that was messy and real. I walked toward the car, my heels clicking on the pavement. I could feel their eyes on my back, but I did not turn around. As I reached the driver's side door, I caught my own reflection in the tinted window. I saw a woman with calm, steady eyes, a woman who was not defined by the 2 empty chairs at her wedding or the 2 broken people she had left behind in a glass lobby, a woman who no longer needed a witness to validate her own existence. I was all the proof I needed. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. The scent of cognac leather enveloped me, a familiar comfort. I placed the box of my belongings on the floor and then reached over and opened the glove compartment. I took out the wedding veil, which I had retrieved from the waiting room before leaving. The security guard had looked at me oddly as I carried it through the lobby, but he had said nothing. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing me inside my own quiet world. The roar of the city became a distant murmur. I turned the key. The flat 6 engine ignited instantly, not with a roar, but with a smooth, powerful hum. It was the sound of a perfectly balanced machine, an answer that required no words. With the engine idling, I carefully folded the veil. I laid it on the empty passenger seat beside me. It was a strange and beautiful sight, that fragile cloud of white tulle resting on the rich brown leather. It was a private ceremony, A final, quiet ritual. I was the bride, and I was the witness. I was the one who had finally shown up to my own wedding. I put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, I saw the Stratagem North Tower for the last time, a vertical razor of glass and hubris shrinking in the distance. I saw the frantic, missed calls from my father beginning to light up my phone's screen, and I silenced it. I was leaving it all behind. The glass scepter, the missed calls, the broken promises, and the people who only remember you exist when you are made of something that shines. As I merged into the afternoon traffic, a single, final thought surfaced, clear and absolute. I spoke the words aloud, my own voice the only sound in the quiet, leather-bound cabin. They didn't come to my wedding. They came when the money came, and I just left with the truth. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me that you took the time to be here. I'm so curious to know where you're all tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know what city or country you're listening from. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Ava's journey. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed it, and if you'd like to support the channel even more, hit that hype button to help this story reach more people.